Breaking news tonight as Canada and the United States are showing signs of progress in resolving the ongoing trade dispute.
Source tells me that there is a sense of urgency right now, that the Canadian side sees a window to try and land a trade deal with the U.S., but the source also says that there are no guarantees that it will happen in the next few weeks. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is here right now in Washington. He met with Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, this morning and posted a photo online calling it a productive meeting. LeBlanc's office says it lasted about 90 minutes, and it's all part of Canada's efforts to try and get the Trump administration to drop or at least lower a series of tariffs hitting Canadian sectors hard. Here's what the Prime Minister said today.
Aluminum, steel.
Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick in Washington today, marking a significant development after Canada dropped some of its retaliatory tariffs to help restart negotiations. The meeting between the two officials was described as productive, with extended meetings that ran longer than originally scheduled.
Well, I'm very encouraged. So as a former policymaker, it is really good to see the constructive meetings that happened. Just the very fact that the meeting ran longer than scheduled is yesterday with Minister LeBlanc and Secretary Lutnick is really, really encouraging. And that suggests that there is real progress in these talks. We have more talks coming today. That is good. And again, suggests that there is progress happening here and that it is possible that a deal could be coming sometime.
This extended time frame is being interpreted by officials on both sides as a positive sign that substantive discussions are taking place. Canadian Ambassador Kristen Hillman and other top officials participated in what sources are calling urgent negotiations to land a trade deal, though no guarantees exist for the coming weeks. Prime Minister Trudeau has outlined Canada's key priorities in these negotiations, focusing on 5 critical sectors: aluminum, steel, automobiles, copper, and softwood lumber.
Details about how this meeting came about. What can you tell us?
JP, the Canadian source tells me that after the Prime Minister's announcement that he would drop some of those countermeasures, that Mark Carney and Donald Trump exchanged texts and that they agreed LeBlanc would come here to Washington for these talks. The source also said there was a recognition from the American side that Canada had taken a significant step by removing some of these countermeasures and that talks should pick up. We also know that Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kristen Hillman, was also at today's meeting with Lutnick. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and Canada's Clerk of the Privy Council are also here. These are all top officials really signaling how serious these conversations could be. But what's not clear, JP, is where these negotiations are at behind closed doors and how close or not Canada actually is to reaching a deal.
The Prime Minister emphasized the importance of finding win-win cooperation in these areas to improve outcomes for both nations. The 90-minute meeting covered substantial ground on these issues, with both sides acknowledging the need for compromise. Meanwhile, a significant legal development has emerged with U.S. federal courts challenging the legal authority behind these trade measures.
CTV National News with Heather Butts. Reporting tonight, Marcia McMillan.
Good evening. U.S. President Donald Trump has called tariff the most beautiful word in the dictionary. Today, a U.S. federal appeals court called them illegal. In a split decision, the judges ruled the president overstepped his powers by implementing certain tariffs, but stopped short of blocking them. The decision could have major consequences for the president's agenda and the world economy, including Canada's. CTV's Mike LeCouture is in Ottawa with the story for us tonight. Mike.
Well, Marcia, nothing changes for any trading partners, including Canada, because the court also said the tariffs can remain in place as the case proceeds. But this is the second court to rule that U.S. President Donald Trump has overstepped his authority by imposing across-the-board duties on imports from dozens of countries. Now, today's ruling is on the 35% tariffs that are being applied to Canadian goods which are not covered by our trade agreement with the U.S. That's also known as CUSMA. It does not affect the punishing tariffs that are being applied to steel, aluminum, copper, or the auto industry, which were applied under a separate act. Trump did respond on his social media, writing in all caps, "All tariffs are still in effect." He called the appeals court highly partisan, adding, quote, If these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. The court basically said the power to impose tariffs rests with Congress, not the president. An American lawyer.
A federal appeals court ruled in a split decision that certain presidential tariffs overstepped executive powers, stating that the authority to impose tariffs rests with Congress. This marks the second court to rule against the Precedent's tariff authority, specifically affecting 35% tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by CUSMA. Despite these rulings, the tariffs remain in place as the case proceeds to the Supreme Court. The economic impact of these trade tensions is becoming increasingly clear.
Marcia, the downturn driven by the ongoing trade war, signaling signs of a possible recession. After months of being assaulted by U.S. tariffs and battered by the ongoing trade war, Canada now showing major cracks in the armor.
This is not a good picture for Canada and what's happening here.
Canada's economy contracted in the second quarter, much more than expected, shrinking by 1.6% on an annualized basis. It's the first quarterly contraction in nearly 2 years and the steepest decline since the pandemic.
Essentially, the big change was in the first quarter, we had a rush to get exports out into the U.S. as quickly as possible. In the second quarter, that all came to a halt as some of these tariffs started to take effect.
U.S. President Donald Trump ramped up tariffs against Canada and the world that quarter, targeting steel, aluminum, and autos, while April, May, and June then saw a sharp drop-off in business investment by roughly 10%.
The depth of decline that we're seeing in the manufacturing sector is something that we haven't seen in many years. And so it is a cause for concern.
Vehicle exports plummeting nearly 25%, industrial machinery exports and travel services also falling drastically. In fact, Canada saw an unprecedented trade deficit in the second quarter, with a big gap between its minimal exports versus its massive amount of imports. The difference between the two, a whopping $19.6 billion in goods and services.
Well, guess what's happening in the middle of a trade war with the U.S.? We're exporting substantially less stuff to our major trade partner.
All of it raising fears of a recession, which economists say Canada would be in if the GDP sees another decline in the third quarter of this year.
We need to be a little bit more cautious, and that caution, of course, feeds into the economy.
The latest GDP figures will put a sharper focus on the Bank of Canada and whether it'll make an interest rate cut in mid-September. Marcia.
Canada's economy contracted by 1.6% in the second quarter on an annualized basis, marking the first quarterly contraction in nearly 2 years and the steepest decline since the pandemic. The downturn was driven primarily by tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles, causing a sharp 10% drop in business investment. Vehicle exports plummeted nearly 25%, and Canada experienced an unprecedented $19.6 billion trade deficit. The Bank of Canada faces a critical decision as it prepares for its September 17th announcement.
First of all, what does this mean for interest rates? Because the Bank of Canada, of course, watches these numbers extremely closely. They haven't changed the rate in a little while, currently set at 2.75%, the interest rate. That very likely could be in play again on September 17th when the bank announces its next change to the interest rates, very likely to come down at least a little bit. The market pricing in about a 50% chance currently of an interest rate cut. In large part also because Canada is doing pretty well at controlling inflation. So this is always the risk, and you see this happening in the United States, the debate over the Fed in the U.S. about whether or not they should accede to Donald Trump's repeated demands to lower interest rates at the risk of driving up inflation because of the United States has put tariffs pretty much on all imports into their country. So that's a different balancing act than we have here in Canada. The bank's got a little bit of more wiggle room here to move. We could move to reduced interest rates without potentially causing a spike.
With interest rates currently at 2.75%, markets are pricing in about a 50% chance of a rate cut. Canada's success in controlling inflation gives policymakers more flexibility compared to their American counterparts, who face pressure for lower rates despite the risk of inflation from import tariffs. The trade dispute has also expanded beyond North America. India now faces a massive 50% tariff on its exports to the United States, cited as punishment for continuing to purchase Russian oil.
Yes, and this move by President Donald Trump is certainly a big blow to ties between India and the US, which have been growing closer in recent years. And we've seen Prime Minister Narendra Modi here and President Trump seeming to have a good relationship. So in some ways, this is a bit of a surprise that things have deteriorated so quickly. But that is a massive blow. 50% now, the additional tariffs on India in total. And this will have a major impact with a number of sectors that are going to be particularly hard hit, with President Trump saying that this move was made because of India's continued imports of Russian oil, which Trump says is helping to fuel Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, the impact on the economy, analysts are saying that could be up to 1% in India. They say that India can absorb this overall, but it's those certain sectors that might be impacted very badly, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses find this much harder with potential job losses. That sectors including gems and jewelry, auto components, textiles, for example.
This move represents a significant deterioration in U.S.-India relations and could impact India's economy by up to 1%, particularly affecting small and medium businesses in sectors like gems, jewelry, auto components, and textiles. India has made it clear they will continue purchasing oil wherever they get the best deal, with officials stating that discounted Russian oil helps secure energy supplies and maintain low domestic prices, crucial for economic growth.
Morning, India's ambassador to Russia saying it will continue to buy oil wherever it gets the best deal, following President Trump's threatened penalties for buying Russian crude. The statement comes days before President Trump's 50% tariffs on India take effect on Wednesday. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall joins us now for more. Good morning, Tyler.
Yeah, hey, John, good morning. Well, at this point, we haven't gotten any sort of indications from the White House that they're going to let up on that 50% tariff threat, as it appears that India is digging in its heels. And we know that that discount on Russian oil does help India secure energy supplies and keep domestic prices low, which are important to its growth, which is why our analysts at Bloomberg Economics say that when New Delhi does the risk-reward calculation here, there's no guarantee that the White House would give in any sort of trade concession.
The Indian government has hired a top lobbying firm with White House connections to advance trade talks, signaling their commitment to resolving the dispute through diplomatic channels. American consumers are beginning to feel the pinch from these various trade measures.
It's still a bit of a wait and see, is how I would term it. We are starting to see challenges in the economic data in the United States. But when it comes to trade is a bit of a slow-moving wave. So tariffs are put in place, but the U.S. consumer doesn't necessarily feel them for several months. We know a lot of these price increases in the United States from the tariffs that have been put in place are starting to hit the shelves. We are going to continue to see more of that in the U.S. as we get into September, October, and certainly as we get into the holiday shopping season. So my instinct is policymakers are going to start to hear from their constituents over the next several months. We will start to see it bear out in the economic data, and it's going to be very interesting to see if that starts to color the negotiations from the American perspective. I would say in particular, as we start to get into the CUSMA negotiations, which are on the table and will start soon again, will we start to see the impacts in the economic data that could play a key role in how those negotiations kick off.
Economic analysts describe tariffs as a slow-moving wave that takes months to fully impact consumer prices. Price increases from existing tariffs are starting to hit U.S. shelves, with predictions that policymakers will hear increasingly from constituents in the coming months, particularly during the holiday shopping season. As negotiations continue, both Canadian and American officials stress the importance of finding common ground. The dropping of retaliatory tariffs by Canada has been seen as a good faith gesture to kickstart meaningful discussions. Key issues on the table include various sector-specific tariffs and border security concerns, with both nations seeking concessions similar to those granted to other trading partners. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether these productive meetings can translate into a comprehensive trade agreement that addresses the concerns of both nations, while minimizing economic disruption to businesses and consumers on both sides of the border.